Hey guys, Dr. G. Today we're going to talk about pricing products, and I'll have you go over the learning objectives on your own. When we talk about products, it's basically anything that somebody receives in exchange for what they pay for it. And generally we classify products into consumer products, those that are used to satisfy your personal needs or family needs, versus business or industrial products, those that are used for business purposes. We also classify products with regard to being convenience products, shopping products, or specialty products, and that pretty much varies along a continuum in terms of how often you buy it and how expensive it is. Convenience products are things you buy pretty much every week or on a regular basis, so you don't really put that much thought or effort into it. Shopping products are those that you're a little more willing to put some effort into planning to make the right purchase, so maybe you're buying an iPhone or something. And a specialty product is something that possesses one or more characteristics that to some group of people is worthwhile to put a lot of effort into purchasing or looking for the right features. Products follow a very predictable pattern of their life, which is shown on this graph here: introduction, growth, maturity, decline. And during introduction, it's a new product, and because it's new, people haven't heard about it, aren't really buying it so much. And then over time, people get wind of it and say, oh, hey, I want one. And so that's kind of when it reaches the growth stage. And then at some point, everybody has one, and it's no longer all that exciting or fun. And then that's when it sort of peaks out and hits maturity. And then after the maturity stage, it's sales tend to decline over time. And it's good to keep that in mind because when you're thinking about how much demand there should be for your product or there could be for your product and how to price it accordingly, it's important to have an idea of where it fits in the life cycle. In addition to figuring out where it is in the life cycle, let me go back for just a second, you also need to figure out how long. Like right here, you can see the x-axis is time. But is this a period of 1 year, over the course of the introduction? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it a month? And figuring that part out is really the hard part, right? You don't know how long something is going to be growing until it stops growing often. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the product line and the product mix. The product line is the similar products that differ only with respect to minor characteristics. So, for example, Nabisco has its Oreo line, and there's a gazillion different varieties of Oreo, but they differ on pretty minor characteristics, what the flavor of the cream is and what color they dyed the cookie part or whatever. The product mix is all of the products that a firm offers, and that can be fairly wide in terms of the number of different product lines. So, for example, Procter & Gamble has its Ivory soap line. It has it's got actually a variety of different soap lines. It's got Crest toothpaste. It's got laundry detergent, so on and so forth, as well as the depth of the mix. So how many different types of soaps they have, how many different types of toothpaste they have, so on and so forth. So when marketers think about managing the product mix, part of that is managing the existing products. So what modifications might they make to better meet consumers' demands? What extensions of existing lines might they make? So things that are closely related to one or more existing product, but meets a somewhat different consumer needs. They might think about deleting products, stopping offering a certain product because there's less demand for it, as well as developing new products to meet changing consumer demands. When you think about product development, it's really a multi-stage process. There's an idea, we sort of screen it internally, and then we test the concept, maybe some sort of focus group, and then we do a business analysis of what the likely demand is going to be, and then we start developing it, and then we test market it, and then ultimately it then gets rolled out commercially. And if we go through all these steps, we should have a pretty good idea of how successful it's going to be before it hits the market. But not everybody does that, as we'll get to the next slide. Not everybody goes through all those stages because it's lengthy, and so the organization might try to save on product development costs and sort of skip through some of the steps on the previous slide. Or they may feel like they're in a rush and put a product to market before they have all the bugs worked out. And sometimes there's just simply not enough financing available. They sort of say, okay, well, we need to have it available in multiple retailers, but they don't have the financing to have it stocked at all retailers, so it may end up failing for that reason as well. Branding is very important in marketing, and when we think about brand, it's a lot of the intangible things. I mean, there are tangible things because usually there's a logo or a symbol that helps consumers identify a certain product brand, but there's also a lot of intangible parts of it. So there's the brand name, the brand mark, trademark, and the trade name. All of those the company owns and are physical pieces of property. But there's also some of the intangible things. So when you hear the name Jaguar, that elicits something besides the logo of the Jaguar. It sort of elicits something psychologically that helps drive demand for certain products. So when we talk about types of brands, they could be manufacturer brands, store brands, or generic brands. Manufacturer brands, that's what we commonly think about. The brand is owned by the manufacturer. So Procter & Gamble owns the Oreo brand, for example. It could be a private brand. So if you think about, I guess, like the 365 brand, I think is the Whole Foods store brand. Whole Foods does not actually make food. They actually have manufacturers who make other food, package products specifically so that they can carry the retailer's name on it, the private brand. So, I had mentioned before, there's a lot of this sort of psychological value of having a brand. It's easily recognizable, so sometimes it can reduce the amount of time and effort that consumers have to put into shopping for something. So, I've liked whatever brand products before, so therefore I'm likely to buy them again in the future. And to some extent, it helps people judge quality. So if I buy a Jaguar, even if it's relatively, I don't know that Jaguar sells any inexpensive cars, but if it's a relatively inexpensive Jaguar, sort of their bottom of the line, I'm still going to assume that it's going to be a high quality vehicle. It also allows organizations to introduce new products fairly easily because people already recognize the brand. And again, so going back to the Jaguar thing, if Jaguar were to come out with a new car, they don't need to promote it as much because everybody has heard of Jaguar already. Okay, moving on. To some extent, consumers tend to be brand loyal. So again, you've had a positive experience in the past with a certain brand, so you're more likely to buy it in the future. And that results in what's called brand equity, and that's kind of the intangible value. So if Nabisco were to sell off the Oreo brand to some other company, for example, they would be looking both at, sort of how profitable Oreo cookies are, but they'd also be looking at, what exactly is the brand itself worth? So just to be able to call something Oreo, because nobody can call it Oreo now except for Nabisco, but to be able to call something Oreo has some value associated with it because, again, you can bring new products to market and so on and so forth. So just owning the brand has value in and of itself because of brand name awareness, perceived quality, etc. So when you're thinking about, how to choose a brand, obviously it should be something that people can say relatively easily, spell, recall, so on and so forth. And it should suggest positive attributes and characteristics and distinctive enough to sell it apart from competing brands. When we talk about branding strategies, there's sort of the two general approaches are either individual branding or family branding. Individual branding is using a different brand for each of its products. Okay, I mentioned before Procter and Gamble soaps, and I couldn't remember what the other ones were, but so Ivory, Camay, Zest, Safeguard are all owned by Procter and Gamble. So one advantage of having different lines of soap, because let's face it, none of those products do anything remarkably different than any other. Camay and Zest both do the same thing. They clean your body and they make you smell nice. They both do the same thing, but if there's a problem with one brand, it tends not to affect the others. So if we were to find out that there was some, horrible thing that happened with the Ivory brand, and they found child labor was used to make ivory or something, it's likely to not have an effect on Camay or Zest or Safeguard, because people don't really put those brands together when a company uses an individual branding strategy. But on the other hand, they don't reap the benefits of family branding, because with family branding, promoting any one item or product line helps all of the products. So there's something to be said for having everything branded under the same umbrella brand, sort of the opposite of what Procter & Gamble does. And neither approach is necessarily more or less correct. It's just what works best for a particular organization. I'm not going to, in the interest of time, we only have about 3.5 minutes. I'm going to need to sort of speed it along. Labeling, usually you're going to have the brand and trademark on the label. To some extent, depending on what type of product it is, there are some things that are required. So for garments, you need to have the country of manufacture, fabric content, and cleaning instructions. For food, you need to have some nutritional labeling, and there needs to be certain things that are in common in terms of serving sizes, calories, etc. And labels also often include, they're not required, some sort of express warranty, which is, if you're not completely satisfied with our product, let us know and we'll, give it a full refund. Again, not required, but many organizations do. So how do we get to figuring out what the price is? Price is important because it suggests something about quality, and it also suggests something about how much people are going to be willing to buy your product. So in its simplest form, we sort of look at supply and demand, and we look for the equilibrium point, and that's where we price our products. So here, the quantity supplied, producers are willing to supply more, whatever the product is, when it's at higher prices. People, it's a higher price, I'm going to supply as many as possible because then people will buy more. But of course, consumers see it the opposite way, and this is the demand curve. From a consumer's perspective, the more a product costs, the less demand there's going to be for it, the less they're willing to buy. So we look for the equilibrium point, which is where the supply curve and demand curve intersect, and that's where we want to set our price. I should also point out, and that's a simplified version of it, supply and demand, but there are other things that go into it too, because to some extent, we're sort of socialized to believe that more expensive things are worth more. So oftentimes people are willing to pay, maybe for a brand name or maybe for other reasons. So a Coach handbag isn't really dramatically different than any other handbag, but people are willing to pay more for it. And if Coach started charging less, people would question if it's truly a Coach or is it a knockoff, and so on and so forth. So there's sort of this perception that goes along with pricing that consumers often perceive that they're getting more if they're paying more, which is not necessarily true. I only have about 30 seconds left, so I'm going to stop it there and have you go through the remainder. There's about 8 more slides by yourself. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.